Hi guys, so today is the 6th of December and now I am up to date with my videos. I had a real problem getting them done on time and getting them uploaded onto YouTube, which I'd never done before, but hopefully I should now be getting out one video per day for the rest of December. So 6th of December, chapter 6, here is the picture. A camel can move from place to place as well, a bit like the castles on a chessboard. When Joachim woke up on Sunday morning, it felt as if he had just fallen asleep, for he hadn't woken once during the whole of that long night. Then he realized that he had dreamed, and as soon as he remembered the dream, it seemed to him that the night had been quite a long one after all. He had dreamt that the magic advent calendar was filled with small chocolate figurines that turned into real animals as soon as he opened the doors and let them out of prison. To stop them running away, he had to lock them up in his secret box, and he had only let them out on Christmas Eve. Then all 24 chocolate animals crept out through the window and set off through the countryside. They were going to Bethlehem, because that's where the Christ child was born. Joachim knew that Jesus had loved everyone, but in his dream he had been fond of chocolate too. Joachim sat up and laughed. He was ready to open the 6th door in the advent calendar. Today there was a picture of a round tower. He would look more closely at the picture afterwards. First he had to read what was on the scrap of paper. Caspar. When the boat with Elizabeth, the angel ethereal, Joshua the shepherd, and the 3 sheep touched land on the Danish side of the Ure Sound, they were welcomed politely by a black man. It was Elizabeth who discovered him first. The angel, who was rowing, sat with his back to the shore, and Joshua was busy keeping the sheep quiet. "There's a man over there," she remarked. The angel glanced over his shoulder and said, "Then he's one of us." The black man had a dark cloak with gold buttons, red woolen trousers, and sheepskin shoes. He came towards them, seized the boat, and pulled them up on land. The sheep jumped out first, and soon they were all standing on the beach. The man with the fine clothes bent down and took Elizabeth's hand. "Greeting to you, my child, and welcome. I am King Caspar of Nubia." "Elizabeth," said Elizabeth, curtsying politely. She wasn't quite sure how to behave. Perhaps she should have said that her name was Elizabeth Hansen and that she came from Norway, but that wouldn't have been very interesting just after he had told her that he was King of Nubia. "He's one of the 3 wise men from the East," whispered Ethereal solemnly. "Or one of the 3 kings from the Orient," nodded Joshua. None of this made the situation any easier for Elizabeth. If she was going to say anything, it would have to be that she was the Princess of Toten, or something like that. Then maybe the king would have believed that Toten was a mighty kingdom. The Black King bowed again and said, "The pleasure is on my side of Ure Sound. You should know that I've been standing here waiting for you for so long that between 1701 and 1699 I had to play hopscotch." This sounded so mysterious that Elizabeth began rubbing her eyes to find out whether she was properly awake. It was difficult enough to play hopscotch between squares on the asphalt, but how could the wise man manage to play hopscotch between 2 different years? He explained in more detail. "When I arrived on this shore in the year of our Lord 1701, some fishermen appeared, and they were so dismayed when they saw one of the 3 wise men that I had to take a step backwards. That's how I got to the year 1700. I sat down and looked over the Ure Sound, but after a while a couple of soldiers on horseback came from the fortress in Copenhagen. They too were somewhat dismayed to see a black king. You see, at the moment I am the only black man in the whole of Denmark, at least the only one who is a king of the Orient besides. That sort of thing attracts attention, my friends, for people find it difficult to get used to something completely different. So I hurried back to the year 1699, and since then I have waited here. From that time on I have met neither man nor beast, and I have had no need to hide myself from sun and moon, nor from the stars of heaven either, for the stars are so close to God that they would never permit themselves to gossip about the life of humans on earth." Elizabeth wasn't quite sure that she understood all this, but she did see that she was talking to a real wise man. He was so wise that she didn't quite know where to look. It was a great relief to her when at last the shepherd thumped his crook on the ground. "To Bethlehem! To Bethlehem!" The little procession of pilgrims began to move off again, the 3 sheep first, Joshua and Caspar the Black King next, Elizabeth and Ithuriel last. They leapt along broad cobbled streets, and Ithuriel explained that this was Copenhagen, the king's city. It was so early in the morning that the streets were almost deserted. Elizabeth thought it was a blessing to see a big city empty of cars. Instead, you had to put up with the horse droppings that were fertilizing the streets. "The time is 1648, announced the King Ithuriel. "It's the last year of Christian IV's reign. He became the King of Denmark and Norway when he was still a small child many years ago. Norway is part of Denmark at this time. Christian IV is very fond of Norway and has visited the country often." Soon they arrived at the very centre of the Danish capital. They stopped in front of a church with a round tower at one end. "That's the round tower which King Christian has just built onto the new Trinity Church," said Ithuriel. "The church towers look imposing, but he thought it was a pity that they should stand there to no purpose. So the round tower has been built both as a church tower and as a watchtower, where astronomers can stand in peace and quiet, studying the movements of the planets and the position of stars in the sky. These are the days when the first telescopes are being invented." "That's a strange mixture," said Elizabeth. She felt that she had to say something clever every now and again, but the wise man shook his head. "The stars are created by God too," he said. "So studying the stars in the sky can be like a whole church service. But here they have neither deserts nor camels." Elizabeth stared at him, puzzled, and the wise man continued. "The best way to study the stars, in the opinion of all wise men, is to sit on the back of a camel in the desert. It is almost like sitting in a tower, but a camel can move from place to place as well, a bit like the castles on the chessboard. The only thing that's inconvenient for a camel is to go through the eye of a needle." Elizabeth was not at all sure whether she agreed that the back of a camel could be compared with a church tower, or a desert with a chessboard. "The drawback of a watchtower," King Caspar went on, "is that it usually stands stock still. I've seen a tower that has stood in the same spot for more than 1,000 years. The old walls must get bored with the view. On the other hand, they have experienced how people have come and gone, and perhaps that has given them insight." Elizabeth nodded. Caspar had even more to tell her. "There are 2 ways of becoming wise. One way is to travel out into the world and to see as much as possible of God's creation. The other is to put down roots in one spot and to study everything that happens there in as much detail as you can. The trouble is that it's impossible to do both at the same time." Elizabeth was struck with wonder at the wise man's words. To be on the safe side, she clapped her hands, and the angel and the shepherd did the same. Caspar was infected by their enthusiasm and began clapping too, because he was so pleased with all that had been said. Elizabeth thought it must be fun to keep thinking such clever thoughts. It was as if the wise man had read her thoughts. He said, "Thinking clever thoughts is almost like being at a circus. Not a circus with clowns or elephants, but a real thinking circus. But let it be said once and for all, I am grateful to all clowns and elephants for their attention." Joshua thumped his crook on the cobbles. "To Bethlehem," he said, "to Bethlehem." The procession of pilgrims began to move along the streets again. Through the city and out to the country they went, between swaying fields of corn and cool leafy woodland. Denmark seemed to be extra flat. She could see no tall buildings. The only things that pointed upwards occasionally were the churches they passed, all of them built in honour of a little child who once upon a time was born in Bethlehem. They caught sight of the sea in the distance and came down to a small town called Gaarder, which lay beside the great belt, the broad sound between Zealand and Fyn. The people in the town almost fell over when they caught a glimpse of the astonishing procession, but their terror lasted only a short time, for the next moment the procession had moved 1 or 2 weeks backwards in the history of the town. Then there were other people who caught a glimpse of the pilgrimage for a second or two. At that time there was continual talk of angels. Joshua pointed to a large rowing boat at the water's edge. "We shall have to borrow that," he said. "Hurry up now, it's nearly 1600 years after Jesus' birth," and he fell to chasing his sheep on board. Elizabeth felt she had to ask whether this wasn't stealing, but Ithuriel reminded her that Jesus had to borrow an ass when he rode into Jerusalem. A little later they were out on the great belt. The angel rowed with one oar, the black King Caspar with the other. He had to work hard in order to row as strongly as Ithuriel. When Mamma came in to look at the advent calendar, Joachim forgot that he mustn't talk about what he had read on the folded piece of paper. She leaned over the picture. "That must be the Tower of Babylon." Joachim shook his head. "Oh no, that's the round tower in Copenhagen." Mamma looked at him in astonishment. "Who told you that?" "No idea," replied Joachim. That was how Mamma answered him when he asked her something she couldn't tell him. "It's impossible to play chess with a tower like that, because it stands stock still, and if you sit inside it you soon get bored with the view, but on the other hand you may get some insight." Mamma clasped her hands together. Joachim thought it was because he had said something clever, but all she said was, "But Joachim, where do you get all this from?" That's the end of chapter 6. I apologise, guys, for my bad pronunciation of some of the name places. I am doing my best. I've been trying to look them up to pronounce them correctly. Let me know if I'm failing at that. Okay, see you tomorrow. Bye.